Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News Preview Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is Adam White. We've had one hell of a European midweek, but unfortunately no French teams involved, but plenty of crazy news to go through. But we're going to skip the actual headlines and jump straight into things. But do remember, for all the latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. Also, you can vote on our awards both through our Twitter feed and on the website. Please do, for 50% of your votes are included in our end of season awards. We're starting this evening with Paris Saint-Germain, who continue to have a little bit of a firestorm, really, and it continues in numerous different reports. It was particularly prevalent in the Neymar one we saw, Adam, over sort of Tuesday night and Wednesday, was that he had an argument with Draxler during one of the games. One of the reasons he'd called out younger players such as Kimpembe is that Tuchel had given some advice at halftime during the Nantes game, and he, as captain, had essentially said to disregard it, which he saw as disrespectful. And then also Draxler sort of calling out Neymar's selfishness, with him almost saying pretty much, who are you to talk, really, which is not surprising on Neymar terms at least. But a couple of wrinkles going out, and then there's even the strange one that came earlier today as well, where the Paris Saint-Germain's actual Twitter feed come in a strange defence of Neymar almost as well, which seemed particularly peculiar for an official Twitter account to do. It seemed very defensive and unnecessary when we hear these reports about a number of clubs in these sort of situations, but the circus goes round and round and round at PSG at the moment.
It really does. I really think that both of these situations that you mentioned and the Thiago Motta situation, which we'll get onto afterwards later on in the pod, are kind of just sort of signs of the atmosphere and the state of play at PSG. When you're a club so hell-bent on one thing, which, having achieved domestic success, is European progression, which obviously this season they didn't get anywhere with, and their European campaign ended into a disastrous fashion, as it has a number of times recently. That becomes obviously very frustrating, and there are a lot of competing ideas, competing philosophies, and competing egos around the club, and it's not necessarily natural, but it's pretty likely that some of those competing ideas or competing philosophies are going to naturally sort of butt heads. And when you pander to those egos of the club, they pander, as you mentioned, that Twitter news from the PSG official account on Neymar, and when you pander to those egos that PSG have to Neymar, and perhaps even to Antero Henrique, perhaps even, I know that Nasser Al-Khelaifi is in charge, but you get the feeling he's indulged a little bit perhaps by the owners, then this feels like it's only natural. And when the club aren't succeeding, it sort of breeds this sort of crumbling kind of attitude, this crumbling kind of feel to the way the club does its business. And I think that taking the first point with the sort of unrest in the dressing, which is obvious. Interesting that Neymar said after the game at the Stade de France with Rennes, when they lost the Coupe de France final, as you said, he sort of criticised younger players, saying they didn't listen. They answer back when the manager's something, and when senior players do something, they answer back. And it seems that he was talking directly about that instance you mentioned with Presnel Kimpembe. And although the detail of that report is surprising, that the fact that it happened really isn't. The way Kimpembe is probably a symptom of a wider issue at PSG. He's come through the youth system. He's for better or worse a PSG youth product. That is ingrained upon him. The PSG mentality, whether that is good or bad, is ingrained upon him. And it's no surprise that these competing egos and these competing ideas and the sense that they're of entitlement, treating with Adrien Rabiot, which is he's another player in a similar position, sort of is comes out via that sort of a sense of entitlement, that sense of arrogance, perhaps, to dismiss senior players and say what he did about the manager in that dressing room with Nantes. And I just feel that the club is sort of coming apart a little bit. It feels like these sort of things are just becoming increasingly common, and Neymar and Draxler falling out, and as we mentioned, the Thiago Motta situation. And I feel like this is coming back to the hierarchy. We can say a lot about the players and we can say a lot about the manager, but the tone of the club is set by those in charge. And I feel that perhaps Nasser Khelaifi's position is completely untouchable, given that he's sort of a friend of the Emir of Qatar, and I don't know how he would ever lose his position. I don't know how PSG or the club could perform bad enough for him to lose that position. And Thierry Henrique seems to fall out with pretty much everybody. We'll talk about Motta in a minute, but supposedly Thomas Tuchel as well. And it just feels like that there are a lot of situations that won't get resolved because they're too sort of ingrained within the club, that this attitude and various sort of higher up positions. And I don't know how it gets better. It's very difficult to say that they're going to change their ideas or the philosophy, and that later youth products that come through or players that have spent a long time at the club aren't going to have that sense of entitlement that Kimpembe and Adrien Rabiot have shown.
Yeah, and it gets stranger because I can't imagine any player, especially someone like Presnel Kimpembe, that even though he's had a poor season and he has done stuff, I can't imagine any player going ignore what the manager's just said. I wouldn't be surprised if this is maybe a miscalculation from Neymar's point of view, maybe even a language issue, maybe potentially that he's under. I suppose what could have happened is maybe taking as a pinch of salt that Kimpembe maybe have said, let's not listen to what the manager's just said in terms of he's just shouted at you. Okay, let's ignore what he's just said in terms of getting angry at you. Let's calm you back down. Maybe consoling you is better if he has had one of those moments, getting them their focus back. And sometimes that happens with some younger players. It can really distract them. So maybe he was trying to do the right thing in essence, but things like that can be lost. But it just, like you say, it just seems to be pandering to things, and there seems to be no plan, and there seems to be. I can't believe that Antero Henrique is still in their job. Really, to be fair, with all the things coming out, and then you look at reports today that they're thinking about keeping Kevin Trapp, which seems utterly absurd compared to. Yes, he's had a good season at Frankfurt. He's actually still playing at the moment in the semi-final against Chelsea, and he's had a really good season, but you've got Buffon on the books at least until next season as well. And if anything, Areola's been the best, if not one of the best Paris Saint-Germain players this season. So are you wanting to unsettle him? Are you wanting to give Buffon less games after giving him so much money? It just seems ill-advised, especially when you can get a pretty good sizable fee out of Kevin Trapp now. Really is the thing they should be thinking about. Is right, he's had a real bounce back season, excellent. There's a couple of clubs in Germany that are looking for a keeper, including Bayern Munich reportedly, and with Nana Neuer getting consistent injuries and getting up on age, and he may be nearing retirement in the next couple of years or so, that they may be looking at someone like that. You could get maybe a good 30 million, 35 million euros if you're lucky. It just doesn't seem nonsensical, and we've touched about it briefly, Adam. Thiago Motta's looking like he's going to be leaving Paris Saint-Germain this summer. He's currently the under-19s coach, but he's been frustrated by a number of things. He's not really spoken to the PSG board since December. He's been sort of thrown with. Sometimes he's got a team of under-19s one week, and essentially it's an under-17 squad the next week because people are just moving here, there, and everywhere. He doesn't know whether that will help the players, especially. I know they're obviously touching sometimes with the senior players, but it's not the perfect environment, he thinks, at least anyway, for that to help them grow by jumping from one level of football to the other so frequently, and they don't really have a structure, and he just feels like he's stuck in the middle of nowhere. But at the same time, given how Paris Saint-Germain have treated a lot of their younger players and players coming through the system, it doesn't seem entirely surprising, and you can't really blame Motta, who is pretty ambitious, has been ambitious as a footballer, and I imagine that's carried over as a coach, that you're not surprised that he's thinking, well, this is a little bit of a bit of a cloud, and you should really leave and maybe look at going somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think there's something that you touched on there. He's quite ambitious as a player, I think, and he's probably quite ambitious as a coach. He was also quite combative as a player, and I imagine that he's the same off the field as well, and he's got a lot of interesting ideas. And if looking into the way he wants to play, there was talk of him playing his goalkeeper in midfield in a 2-7-2 formation earlier this season, which was very interesting. And I imagine he doesn't he's not a yes man. He's not going to just sit quietly and get what he's given, and when he feels it's wrong, he's not going to just take any rubbish, basically. And if he feels that he is being, taken for a ride a little bit, and he's not being listened to, and he's not being allowed to do the job he wants to do and feels he can do, he should leave, because it sounds like he's got some interesting ideas, and it would be interesting to see him implement them with a consistent team at youth level for PSG. He could be a really interesting coach, and it's a shame that it hasn't worked out, because there were he was getting a lot of attention earlier this season when he started with the youth squad. So although I think they were beaten by Liverpool quite comfortably in the UEFA Youth League, but also I think that the nature of the CFR divisions, which are now National 1, 2, and 3 in France, and the youth team squad, and the under-19s and the 17s, there is a lot of moving around between those teams. So it's possible that that's something he may not have foreseen at one point, and it's just become a little bit frustrating. And perhaps at a club like PSG, there is a little bit more moving of the UEFA Youth League, and sometimes players even drop down to help the CFR team if they're in trouble with relegation from their National or CFR group. So there is, I think there's probably still another side to it, but yeah, it's a shame that it's not going to work out for him. It doesn't look like, but it feels like, given, like, as I said previously, that the egos of the club, and the fact that Antero Henrique has kind of fallen out with everyone, and Thiago Motta is quite a competitive personality anyway, that this isn't really a surprise. But hopefully he'll continue to have a coaching career, because it'd be interesting to see him implement his ideas. And he was an intelligent footballer and a very good player as well as his career, so I'm sure that he's still got a lot to offer.
Yeah, combative, if anything, as well. To be fair, if he's anything like his footballing days in management, he might butt a few heads, and it's not surprising that that's happening here. But that's because he's forthright in his ideas, and a little bit of a clown show, really, at PSG at the moment. They really need a good clearing out, not just of players, but a couple of those people maybe above the manager, and I'm sure the manager will be fighting for his corner, because there's no uncertain terms that if things aren't sorted in the summer, that no way he's too cool living in that fire just to get all the blame. He'll shut up shop and clear out the house as soon as he can, and no doubt they'll still be interested in him in other sections, especially in his home country as well. Maybe even Bayern Munich might have a look at him in the near future. Let's move on to more positive stuff and back into Ligue. And now we've sort of skirted around the crazy news of the week, at least, and we're going to start with the earliest game that we have, and that's Saint-Etienne versus Montpellier on Friday night. Important for both teams still. They're both still chasing a European place, although it's slightly more out of hands for Montpellier now than it is for Saint-Etienne, really, because they would need to definitely win this game and then have other results go their way. But we'll start on them, Adam, because Saint-Etienne are obviously potentially closing in a Champions League place. But this game essentially is Montpellier's season. If they win this, they still have a fight for fourth if they can get a few results for Ligue going their way. But if they lose this game, it's absolutely mathematically all over. And that's got to be a real motivator for them, hasn't it? Because in the last couple of games, they've been a bit iffy in the second half of the season, but Molle's had an excellent couple of months, I think, a couple of assists, a couple of goals, and they've not lost in 4, won 3 of the last 4 as well, including that good win against Paris Saint-Germain. They've put themselves in position, at least. It's just seeing if they can give themselves a chance with a couple of games to go.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think it's the fact that they're sitting 5th, and deservedly so. They've been better than Marseille overall this season. Whether they end up in Europe or not, I think the season should be taken in the context of maybe the previous 5 seasons, when it's been pretty clear that a top 6 gets you into Europe in Ligue, and with PSG winning both cups, and the fact that both cups this season have gone to effectively mid-table teams in Rennes and Strasbourg was pretty unthinkable at the start of the year. PSG winning both cups was pretty likely, and them losing them to Lyon or Lille after they're a good start, and or Marseille or Monaco perhaps at the start of the season was relatively likely. But 5th not being a Europa League spot was extremely unlikely. So I think Montpellier deserve a huge amount of credit whether they get into the Europa League or not, because this is a comfortable Europa League spot in the last 5 years, maybe longer than that. And Michel de Zakarian has had a bit of an up and down career at Nantes, when he was very conservative, but built a very sort of pragmatic team and got results, but never really managed to maintain a European challenge. Couldn't really figure out how to do that and score goals. Dropped down to Reims in Ligue 2, only finished 6th, 7th with them in Ligue 2, even though they're probably the biggest, one of the biggest clubs definitely, and one of the biggest budgets and had a good youth system. Couldn't really get them up, and was very surprisingly given the Montpellier job. And I think he's really learned from those two previous experiences, and he's really sort of gelled a fantastic team, signed the right players, and they complement each other really well. His style complements Delors and Laborde up front, and the creativity of Florent Mollet, and they're a really good team. They've really proven themselves as a really competitive team in this league. And although I don't think they will catch Saint-Etienne, if they win tomorrow, they're away. Saint-Etienne are pretty good at home. It's pretty unlikely that they win. If they do win, they're 4 points off with 2 games to go. Saint-Etienne need just one more win from the last 2, which is pretty likely, and they'll be looking at Lyon above them, only 1 point ahead. So Saint-Etienne will be pretty motivated to win this game tomorrow. But even if they don't, I think that Zakarian is a long shot perhaps for when we get to our end of year awards, but a contender for manager of the season if they finish 5th above Marseille and above Nice and above Monaco. Obviously they're different contexts somewhat, but it's been a brilliant season whether they get into Europa League or not, and he deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah, I think his name's sort of lost, isn't it, in the mix of Christophe Galtier, and then you think to David Guillon and what he's done at Reims and Thierry Loret at Strasbourg winning the cup, and I think we definitely need to throw in the name of Bernard Blackout at Nîmes as well, and we'll come on to them a little bit later. But yeah, they've been terrific. I mean, that's probably the motivation for winning this one is Michel Zakarian should be saying to the club, and it's great to see him get an extension to its deal, isn't it? I think it's another 2 years. I think I saw reading it onto his deal, which is great for him because he's done a terrific job. Although they sort of fell off the wagon a little bit in January, February, March time, they have recovered quite nicely in April. And the speech on this one's pretty simple to the players: is this is your last meaningful game of the season. And yes, it'd be great if we can try and stay 5th, 6th, but the lowest we could realistically drop is maybe into 7th, really, depending with the amount of games left. And that'll be a tremendous achievement, because I mean, we quickly forget that we were tipping these to be struggling this season. We all thought that they would be there or thereabouts around the relegation places, and they've been nowhere near for the entire season, really. And that's true credit to the players, to the recruitment of getting Delors and Laborde in, who've been terrific together, as has Mollet in the last couple of weeks. He really has impressed. He was good at Metz, but he's had a terrific season, his first season in Montpellier, and they'll be delighted. They want to try and keep hold of him, and Shkiri as well, who's had another solid season. They've got Hilton for another year, which is the 41-year-old. He keeps on plugging away. You cannot put a good man down, and he's going to have another year in Ligue 1, which I thought this one would be his last, but he's proved me wrong as well. And credit to them for a fantastic season, and possibly one last salvo here on Friday night. But the difficulty, like you said, Adam, is they're facing a Saint-Etienne side who are on fire with the bit between their teeth, because they're at home in this one with 3 games left, and knowing that Lyon have the tough game that we're going to talk about at the very end later on. There's a real chance to even overhaul them there and get a Champions League spot, which had been unthinkable before the start of the season. And they are on a tear. They have played their last 7 games. They've won 6 of them, drawing the other one. That's incredible form to be finishing the season. And 3 games left. Can they keep the momentum going is the real question, isn't it?
It is. And we talked about managers of the season there. And when you think about where the club were when Jean-Louis Gasset took over after that 5-0 defeat to Lyon last season, which Oscar Garcia, that ended his tenure, and Julien Sablé came in and was well out of his depth. And it was depressing, to be honest. They were even thought about relegation at one point, and in 18 months, maybe close to 2 years, he's completely turned them around, and they haven't made the Champions League. Even though they did brilliant under Christophe Galtier, they didn't get into the Champions League, and although they competed, they didn't make it. And this is probably the closest they've come. So to go from one extreme to the other in what is a relatively short space of time, it was really bad. And after that Lyon defeat, probably the worst night in the club's history, to get into this point. And with Lyon, on their ongoing sort of implosion around Genesio and the new manager, only a point back. They've got to play they've got some difficult games. They've got to go to, this game with Marseille. Saint-Etienne will be fancy, and they're not far off being favourites to finish third, which would be an amazing achievement for Gasset. And one player I want to just highlight with this shout about Saint-Etienne is Remy Cabella. He's been absolutely brilliant in the last 8 games. He's been unreal, and he's really found form that perhaps deserted him a little bit over the winter, and he was a little bit, never played badly, but was a little bit on the fringes of games sometimes, and looked like maybe, at 29, he's sort of pushing 30, maybe his career, 1, was winding down, and 2, he'd never quite reached the potential he showed when he was at Montpellier. Went to Newcastle, didn't really work out, and Saint-Etienne, he's been up and down, but he's been running the team in the last month or two, and looks like the player that we hoped he would be when he was very good at Montpellier as well, obviously, but that he would sort of coalesce and flourish sort of into. So keep your eye on Saint-Etienne, and for the rest of the season, watch Remy Cabello, because he's really on fire.
Yeah, it's great to see him performing so well, because like you've mentioned, we really enjoyed him at Montpellier, and we thought he was going to be a pretty big player, really, to be honest, in the scheme of things. But it's not really ended up that way, unfortunately, for him. It didn't work out at Newcastle. It started well at Marseille, but dipped off. But he's been excellent in Saint-Etienne, as long as a number of their players, really. It's been great to see. They've even started mixing in some extra youth. We've seen some players start to move in as well with the season. Robert Berich has had a good sort of final third of the season. We've had William Saliba, who signed a new contract with the club as well, with a fancy video, and him getting startings next to Loic Perrin. I don't think there's many better in the business to be learning off of, really, than someone who's been a stalwart at Ligue for such a long time. And it's great to see them performing so well, and they'll just hope that they can convince Gasset to keep playing the job full time, because I know there's ummings and ahhings from his camp, at least anyway, of whether he will continue. And he really should. He's been terrific. I mean, we would have been talking about them more if Lille weren't so excellent, that there wasn't really anyone who transformed as much as them last season. But credit to him and his players. They've been tremendous, and what a way to potentially cap it off as well. If they can get Champions League football, it would be maybe a strain on their finances next season if they can get there, and could even be a permanent place depending on who wins the Europa League. So should Chelsea get through, or in fact, if Eintracht Frankfurt stay in their position and win it as well, it will give third place an automatic spot, which would be even greater. So it'd be interesting to see how it phases out. But let's get a prediction, Adam. What do you think the score will be in this one?
I'm going for Saint-Etienne win. They're good at home, 2-1.
Yeah, I think maybe this is a hurdle too far for Montpellier. They have been good, but Saint-Etienne are on a steam train at the moment, and they're going to put some real pressure on Lyon before they play on Sunday. They're going to have a whole of Saturday to think about it. So, yeah, I'm going for a 3-2. I think this will be a really good game. It's going to be pretty open. Both sides know how important a win will be in this one, so they won't be really holding back, which will be great to see. Two more traditionally defensive sides, you would say. On to Saturday's action, because 2 games with teams at the bottom of the table, and starting with the one where it could really do some business, really, and some damage, is Conras, because starting with the home side, Adam, they've been in tremendous form recently, getting the points they needed, really. That win against Rennes a couple of weeks ago looks more and more important by the day as they hit that double-header we've been mentioning forever, and them beating Dijon, and then managed to get a point against Guingamp away from home as well, in what was a rather remarkable game, to be fair, more than anything. But you can't really put them away. They're in the relegation playoffs, and admittedly, there's also a chance that they could even catch Monaco now, and we'll come on to them in a moment, because they're worried and looking behind their back, and this game against France is a chance for them.
It really is. I think it's been surprising their sort of return to relative form. 7 points from the last 9 possible is really good. And given the position they're in, they'll be really happy with that, coming through that double header that we talked about for a long time on the pod being really crucial, and they've taken advantage of that. And they're only 3 points behind Monaco. And there's a real chance, given the way Monaco are playing. I don't think they've won in six games down Monaco. And Jardim didn't really have the answers at the start of the season. It's questionable whether he does now too. And there's nothing to say that they could keep losing. They could lose here to Nîmes, who are really on form as well, playing fantastic football. Caen against Reims, who are the opposite, also in a really abject kind of run of form. And pretty upset to have lost their chance of European football, I would imagine, and have dropped off. But they could be level on points with 2 games to play, and Connor finally finding some quality, I think, is probably the most sort of the best way to describe their excuse me, their run of late. I really like Faisal Fayar. He's been really, really good. Scored the goal, but he maybe slightly flukily, I think. Was it meant to be a cross or not against Dijon? But he's definitely got a lot of technical ability, and he's catching the teams. Only been there one season and has really dragged them through of late. Never ever gets rested or taken off. Pretty much started pretty much at least sort of since sort of August, September. He's played every minute of every league game, and without him, they probably wouldn't be in with much of a chance. And he's really taken sort of the ball by the horns and dragged them back into contention. So this is a huge game. 2 games to go. You're getting to the point next week where it'll be relegation or staying up time. If results go one way or the other, you could end up in one of those 2 situations. And at the moment, although we talked a lot about Dijon after Kambari took over, Caen look by far the most likely, and they're in the best form of the bottom 3. So Monaco should be worried. I think that they're both sort of trending in opposite directions, and Caen could easily catch them this weekend.
Yeah, it's been funny, isn't it? I mean, throughout this sort of relegation battle, we've said Caen's probably the weakest squad. It's probably the one that's in the least amount of form that can struggle to get goals. But at the same time, what they've ended up doing is stopped conceding them. I mean, they're not conceded in 3 games, really, so far, picking up those 7 points. And it's been massive for them, really, having that that sort of defensive solidity has really changed them, because they were just getting battered in some games, really. They were getting put to the sword very quickly and losing quite heftily in the end, especially through that January, February, March period where we thought that they were just goners, really. But they've pulled together. They've got Bruce Samba in the form of his life, keeping them at bay as much as he can, really. And they've gritted out some results. I mean, the game against Nice was not the prettiest, but they grounded out a result. The game against Dijon, like you say, their goal was pretty lucky, but they grounded out the result. The game against Guingamp, they had a couple of chances, but half chances, and same with Guingamp, only really had half chances, but they grounded out the result they needed and the point they needed. And even if they don't end up catching Monaco, even though there's a chance now, which should be real incentive for them now, but there's a real chance that they get a relegation playoff, and with the gritty style that they've got against anyone, that you fancy them really to pull out the result that keeps them in Ligue 1, and what gives them possibly even more hope now, and possibly more hope than they would have done if they looked at this fixture list maybe even a month ago, is that Reims have really fallen off the cliff in the last couple of weeks, Adam. They've not played as well in March or in April as they had done previously. They were excellent during that period where they'd risen all the way up to 5th, but ever since the turn of the April month, they lost to Strasbourg. The draw to Lille was pretty good. They drew to Monaco, lost to Saint-Etienne, drew to Angers, lost pretty heavily to Nîmes as well, a 3-0 defeat. I mean, those 2 defeats, especially at the tip and the end of it against Strasbourg and Nîmes, you couldn't have imagined them conceding more than 2 goals in a game previously, but they've let their standards slip a bit recently, haven't they? Are they sort of relaxed, thinking that we're safe now, the European thing is gone, and we might as well just try and enjoy our football for the last half of the season?
I think there's possibly an element of them losing a little bit of intensity now that they're pretty much, they're probably fancy themselves finishing the top half, and the European dream, if you like, is evaporated with that Rennes Cup final win. And they've definitely been a lot less organized. It's difficult to say they've been less organized, but they've just been a little less defensive rigor from Reims in the last couple of months, which was sort of their trademark in the first half of the season. And I think they tried to be, as I've mentioned before on the pod, there was a little, with the addition of Arbazanelli, who's the attacking sort of wide player, sort of playmaker inside forward. There was an attempt to be a little bit more expansive, and as I said previously, that might have upset the balance a little bit, and they've started to just be a little bit more porous and left a little bit more space, and their attention has shifted perhaps from being a team that's difficult to beat to a team that's going to go and win games. And perhaps while that's very admirable, perhaps they weren't ready to make that shift just yet. from David Guillon, and their recruitment's been really good. You look at the players they have added both in the summer, having lost a lot of players that got them promoted, and in the winter with the addition of Zanelli. And Baba Rahman is technically a decent signing for a couple of runs. He's been pretty rubbish, but it was decent getting him in the first place, I suppose. So that's one explanation. The other explanation is that the first 2/3 of the season were more form than they were overall quality of the team, which makes the start of next season extremely important, because this form isn't far off relegation form in the last couple of months. I think they've won 1 in 7. They haven't, you listed their results there, and they've been pretty poor. And if they were to play like that for a whole season, they'd probably go down quite comfortably. And although players like Mathieu Cafaro, Remy Udan, he's got 10 goals to be fair to him, Javier Chevavalan, and one or two others, like Younis Abdelhamid, before the start of the season, they were seen as obviously there's a good degree of development and a degree of progression as a club as a whole, but they weren't seen as necessarily of league and quality. The players later in the career, Cafaro aside, Udan obviously aside too, but Chevavalan and Abdelhamid and players like that, and perhaps the organisation that Guillon instilled in the team, and the sort of bounce after winning Ligue 2, and their form was the determining factor in their results rather than an overall quality of the team. I think that's maybe a little bit harsh to say that, but it's possible that there's an element of that. So next season will be really crucial. When if it gets to September, October, and they're still playing like this, then they should be very worried, because they just sort of continue the form from the previous season. I think one thing they'll need to address over the summer is signing a genuine central forward. I think. Although Pablo Chevalier has had his moments this season, I don't know that he's ever really shown himself the quality to get them double figures, which obviously Udan has, but I don't know if he could be relied on necessarily going forward to do that every year if they're going to stay in Ligue in longer term. So although Boulaye Dia, I like him a lot, 22, he's broken through this year and perhaps taken that position away from Chevalier. Again, I don't know if he's necessarily shown that he's going to consistently get them lots of goals from that position. So central forward, and perhaps just regroup and go back to what made them productive in the first half of the year. And hopefully by the September-October international break, we're talking about the runs that we had in the first half of the season.
Yeah, and I suppose that's also the thing they'll have to think about in the summer as well, is that there's going to be someone coming in for Remy Udan as well. There's going to be offers that they're going to have to sift through and either stick away from if they're not paying enough, or unfortunately let him go on to pastures new. He's been terrific for them, really, but they'll be the first to admit that maybe he might be outgrowing them a little bit, and replacing him will be difficult. But at the same time, we thought losing Sibacho and others last summer would be the hammer blow for them. But they've been really excellent, really, and I don't mind them taking the foot off the gas a little bit. It's just been a shame that they've not been able to keep the scoring beats up more than anything. They've not been able to try and hammer home what they had sort of regained, really, from that when they beat Montpellier 4-2. I'm remembering, and even the 2-2 draw against Amiens. But in the last couple of games, really, you look back at their recent results through April, and there's only 2 goals in those 6 games, which is pretty worrying when we thought they were starting to find their attacking intent. And that's like you say, why they need a striker, why they need maybe a complement to Zanelli to find, and maybe even look at sending Baba Rahman back, because he's not. I don't think he quite fits their philosophy, and he made an awful mistake at the weekend to allow Niamh to get back into it. But let's get predictions then. I'm going for a 1-1 draw in this one. I can't see Caen being strong enough to pull off a win against Reims. I don't think they've got the moxie in them at the moment, unfortunately. But it's going to be a close one. I don't think Reims are going to run away with it in any shape or form. But what do you think it will be, Adam?
I'm going to say Caen 1-0. I think that Reims are a little bit on the beach, and as over the various factors we just discussed, and Caen are in some decent form, and they need the win a lot more. So I'm going to go with Caen 1-0 just.
Yeah, it's going to be a really, really interesting game, that one, for that bottom of the table fight. But the other important game for them, really, because if they are to win that game, Caen, they would love for Monaco to be dropping points, and they've got an interesting game, a tricky one, especially against Niamh away from home. And speaking about the home side first, really, before we come on to Monaco's recent woes, is Nîmes have been in excellent form in this latter stage of the season, really. The last 6 games, they've won 4 of them. The defeats coming against Marseille and Lille, which is nothing to be really embarrassed about, but a 3-1 win against Reims was excellent. And much like we've mentioned, how disappointing it was for Reims to lose 3-0 to Nîmes. They've been were absolutely excellent in the game. They're scoring a lot of goals at the moment. They're getting back to that free-flowing style that we saw at the first half of the season that maybe they couldn't quite recapture all the time in the second half of the season. But they've been really excellent climbing up the table. They'll potentially even finish higher than Reims now as well. They're getting goals from all different places. And your favourite player and our favourite player now as well, Teji Sedevanier, has had a tremendous season as well.
Yeah, he really has. He's been unbelievable, really. And I know I've talked about him on the pod before, but top assister in Ligue, and more than Pepe, more than Angel Di Maria. He's got 12 assists. And considering that he's not a forward, he's effectively a defensive midfield player. He usually plays as the central or the deepest of the 3 midfield players. To get that many assists for a promoted side is unbelievable. And I think it's just watching him play. Watching him play every week, it's just he just dominates games effortlessly. It's amazing. And given he's 27 and he's been around a while, he's been at Nîmes and he's been at Arles and he's been at Montpellier when he was younger. I'm surprised that he hasn't been picked up on. I know our Ligue 2 analyst, Will Gain, who's been on the pod previously, talk about Ligue 2 as well. He really liked him when he covered them in the second division and say what a good player he is. And the fact that he's been able to translate that to Ligue 1 really is a testament to his quality, and his passing is perfect. The way he sort of drags his team forward, dictates play, is amazing. And I think that there are 2 things to say about Nîmes here. I think we talked about Reims just now, and they're 2 differing seasons. Nîmes are above Reims in the table, and we talked a lot about how good Reims are, but Nîmes will probably finish above them given the way they're both playing at the moment. So it's difficult to say who's had the better season. I know that Reims transfer Europe and then dropped off, and then Nîmes have had this late run. But at the end of the season, Nîmes might have more points. So where do we place the value on that form or that later run? Which one is more worthwhile? I know maybe there's an element of teams dropping off and being a little bit lax towards the end of the season from Reims' point of view. But Nîmes, more points. You can't argue that they've arguably had the better season. They've been really fantastic to watch and scored a lot of goals. And Savania has been sort of central to that. The only thing is, what happens if he's not there? And although this Nîmes team are very exciting to watch, they've got some good attacking players. Dennis Bouanga, I like. Salah Tiob's had some really good games this season, especially in the first half of the year. Antoine Bobichon's good for a spectacular goal. Sofiane Alakouche is a very good right back and probably only 20, probably won't be there too long. Say Savania goes to, say, he could go anywhere in Ligue. He could say goes to Marseille, which would be a perfect fit for me and the type of player they desperately need. And he could, I honestly would back him to run that team like he's run Nîmes. I don't know what happens to Nîmes without him, because although Bernardoni is a very good goalkeeper, he's capable of being a bit flappy. Anthony Briançon is also a little bit clumsy at centre back. They haven't really got much support alongside him at all. They've done well to get away with not conceding more goals, to be honest, with a pretty leaky defence. They don't really have a goal scorer. They've sort of switched between Rachid Aloui and Umut Bozok, who got 41 goals in Ligue 2 between them, but neither of them have looked Ligue 1 quality. And Baptiste Guillaume has come in as well, who I personally think is a pretty awful player and has had a pretty terrible season, even if he was in the team at the start of the year. So there are a lot of holes in his team, and to be honest, Savania is carrying them. So if he was to move, I would be really worried for them. And Bernard Blackart, as we discussed previously in the pod, isn't necessarily going to stay. They haven't really. I don't think they've announced whether he's going to stay next season, whether he is going to stay. And given he's done a really good job with limited resources and honestly limited resources in terms of playing staff, he could easily be poached by a bigger club in the division. So while this is a fantastic season and they could finish 8th, that would be an amazing return. If Savania goes, and there's a lot of interest in him, he probably will go. Although he's a bit of a sort of a home bird. He still lives in Marseille with his family and his parents and has been reluctant to move further away, so he could still stay. But if he does go, they'll be in real trouble. But overall, I think we should probably say that you could argue Nîmes had the best season out of the promoted teams, and they finish 8th. Blackout's another contender for Manager of the Year.
Yeah, sound the Adam says Savanier is a homebird klaxon, because we've mentioned it on Monday's show as well. That I know that we mentioned a bit frequently, and he has been tremendous. To be fair, we can't really say superlatives enough. I mean, I think it's pretty surprising he wasn't on any sort of best of Ligue 1 list in terms of official ones. I know. Wink, wink. The GFFN are definitely showing him some love, so do go and vote for him, because he's been terrific this season compared to a lot of midfielders in Ligue 1. And Marseille does seem like a great fit, even at his age. He'd be an excellent addition to their creativity from deep as well. But like you say, that it's interesting to try and compare the difference between RAS and Nîmes this season, because, like you say, Nîmes didn't really bring anyone in. To be fair, during the summer, there wasn't a massive overhaul of players, whereas RAS lost a load of players, but at the same time, especially in January, brought in a fair few. So it shows you that both ways work. It shows you that both RAS's incredible defensive solidity in the first half of the season and Nîmes' gung-ho attacking style both can kind of work in this division, and should give hope to those that are coming into Liga next season in a blueprint of how you can do things, because there's not one way of playing football. There's not one way of playing winning football either, and it's great to see both have shown it. And maybe, I think, from my opinion, Nîmes may be shaded just because they play fun football more than anything. But on to their opponents, because we've mentioned a few times that Monaco have quietly slipped really in the last couple of weeks. They had that turnaround once Jardim came back in February, and a couple of points in March as well. But since then, since they're winning against Lille, they've not won in 6 now. They've picked up 3 points at that point. They've 3 draws and 3 defeats, one coming against Paris Saint-Germain and the other Saint-Etienne last weekend. But one against Caen was a bit of a head scratcher. But at the same time, like we say, they're only 3 points above Caen now. They need the 3 points, although they can say that they've got a great game against Amiens next weekend as well to try and add some extra ability to the point. But they're really, really out of sorts at the moment.
Yeah, they really are. And I can't help but think that, okay, there are 2 ways to look at this. That you could say that it's been an awful season overall. It's been a roller coaster with Henry and Jardim being sacked and then being begged to come back, and heavy defeats and really abject performances at one time or the other. And now Jardim's been a bit more control. That it's just get past the season. We're just going to get out of the way, and we're going to regroup in the summer, and we'll be something close back to normal in at the start of next season. They get the players in and that Jardim wants, and build a squad that he's given even more control to build, and they'll be fine, assuming they stay up. But you could also argue that they're a team that have ingrained issues, and that. And when they were struggling at the start of the year, although I honestly at that time I would have said that getting rid of Jardim was a bad idea, because he's a great coach, a fantastic coach, as we've said before so many times. And he would. I honestly thought at that point I was sort of the opinion that he would have found, I would have backed him to find answers to their issues. But he's come back in. Okay, there's a lot of damage left over from the Henry debacle, but after that new manager bounce, when they seem to sort of regroup and they seem to be a little bit of a release, as it often is when they there's a change of coach. The last 6 games they've been really poor, and you look at their squad and it's ridiculously good for their position. It's probably better than Saint-Etienne's. It's probably the 4th best squad in the division. It's probably better than Marseille's, and all right, it might not be up there with Lille, or definitely obviously not PSG, but on paper, I would argue they're the 4th best team in the division, and they're struggling at the bottom of the league, despite the fact that Jardim has been back for a long time now. So, does he actually have? Is it just the case that the relationship, in an emotional sense, in a way that he connects with the team and the squad and the fan base and the club in general, is bruised or broken? Is it just not going to work? Is it just not the right fit anymore? He didn't have, like I said very briefly, didn't have the answers at the start of the season, and it's beginning to look like he doesn't now. So, was it the right idea to bring him back? Maybe it will probably keep them up, because I think they would have got relegated under Henry if he'd stayed to the end of the year. Obviously, there would have been other options if when they got rid of Henry to bring in other coaches, but they've sort of, I don't know how are they going to get rid of him again if this keeps going, if they keep playing like this and into next season. It's really difficult to know where the club is going, and I just feel I've got a horrible feeling that the Jardim Monaco relationship came to an end. But maybe contradictory to what I said when he got sacked, maybe it was the right time, and that he perhaps can't. It's sort of beyond his control a little bit now, and he hasn't got the answers that he didn't have previously. So it's a really interesting situation, and I imagine there'll be a lot of turnover in the summer, and they'll probably start the team with next season with a varsity influence squad. But even so, they've got the tools to do much better than they are doing now, and they've had the time to gel to some extent. And given the quality around them, they should be far better. So I've just got a horrible feeling that Jardim, although I really love him and he's a brilliant coach, it might just not be the right fit, and getting him back might have been a bad idea.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think they quite clearly need a big clear out in the summer. I don't think some of these players are working hard enough, and they'll be pretty satisfied that, for one thing, in terms of at least financing that Tielemans has had an excellent second half of the season with Leicester, and that's going to fund some of this cash, at least anyway, if they don't decide to try and keep him in any shape or form more. And then, they need a lot of players, to be fair. Like you say, the squad on paper looks incredible, really. It looks like it should be much, much higher, but you start to dive into it a little bit. Daniel Subasic he's a little bit injury prone. Diego Benalio has been a little bit as well, and has been pretty poor, really, in all honesty, when he has played. And Sedusi is nowhere near good enough to play at this level. And then you move into the defence, and I can't even look at any of those having a good season. And even Benoit Badiashile has had a couple of moments, but it's a pass because he's young more than anything. I mean, Fode Ballatore has gone and sunk into the same problems that he had at Lille last season, and I mentioned on Monday's show, watch the spoon goal, because it's utterly dreadful, really. I can't understand how he's even attempted to try and do that. He could have even taken the time to take a touch, but it shows the erratic nature they've had this season, that they need 3 defenders minimum, really. I mean, they brought Naldo in and he's done nothing. They've still got Raji on their books, and he's not. Too old, too slow. Kamil Glick's taken a huge step back. Jemison is reverted, possibly even worse than he was before. He had that little uplift the season they won the league. They need at least 3 defenders. And then you even move into midfield. I mean, it's just full of disappointments, really. Aolu has been terrible. Golovin has been awful. Lopez has taken a step back, even though there has been injury issues. Chadley, be useless. Adrian Silva, okay, but not great enough. Fabregas, he's had 0 assists. That's enough for me to let you know. That's the main reason you bring a player like that in, and he's not been able to achieve it. I mean, the only one who can really, admittedly, hold his head up high for me, really, is Gelson Martins. Has at least tried to do something since he's been back in, but I don't think any of these players otherwise can really do something. Maybe Falcao as well, but maybe they look at trying to sell him as well to try and improve. But there's a lot of differences they need to make in the summer, and they could be dragged into it, really, because it's going to be a tough game at the weekend. Adam, what do you think the score will be?
I fear for Monaco a little bit here, but I'm going to give them maybe a draw, 2 each.
I think this is going to be a 2-0 Nîmes win. I've been really disappointed by Monaco, and I think they get enough points in the game after that against Amiens. I think they maybe get a draw, and Caen haven't got enough maybe to get like a 3 points to catch them up, but they're going to maybe need to rely on other people to be much worse than them to really avoid that relegation playoff. On to our final game of the weekend, and it's the big one, really. But you'd be surprised if we were leaving this one out, really. And it's Lyon versus Marseille. It's massive for both sides. I want to start with Marseille, really, because it matters a little less to them than it might have done a couple of weeks ago, because they're practically out of the European hunt. They would need Montpellier to get something at Saint-Etienne to even stand a chance, and even then they've got to then catch Montpellier, which makes it even more difficult. So European football seems out of the question for Marseille, but reports starting to link them with players maybe in the summer. And a fantastic one that I really enjoyed, Adam, and thought we'd have a little bit of a chat about is the rumoured approach for Rangers striker Alfredo Morelos, which some are saying maybe is a replacement for Balotelli, but I'm desperate to see what could possibly be the most fiery strike partnership in the history of football, aren't you?
Yeah, it really could be. It could be extremely combative, as the word we used earlier, if they were to be paired up front together. I think though that would be an interesting signing, but I think there's a big step between, not necessarily, Rangers are a big club, but in terms of quality for sure, between Marseille and Rangers in the divisions they play in. And although I think Morelos is an interesting player, and is definitely talented. Whether he's the answer to any of the problems at Marseille, I think is very doubtful. I think, first of all, Balotelli has proven himself in Ligue when he's happy. First seasons at Nice, he was very, very good. Got 33 and 51 games in his first 2 seasons. It's a great return in a league that's not easy to score goals. Obviously, this season he did the classic Balotelli thing, didn't get what he wanted, and sort of there was a bit of toy throwing and didn't score at all in his 10 games of Nice. But since he's come into Marseille, he looks happy again. Looks like he's up for it, basically. And he's 18, 12, and if they have to keep him somehow going into next season, that should be number one job. In terms of other additions, I think I was writing about them this week, and I think that there's going to be an issue with finances. There was a deficit of sort of 70 plus million announced at the end of last season. They're going to be worried about FFP. Frank McCourt has said, I think he said 3 seasons ago, perhaps, that he looked to invest 200 million over the next 4 years. And Jacques-Henri Hérault has said already that they've invested 160 to 180 million already. So that if assuming those 2 figures are correct, they're nearing sort of the end of that initial investment, although they have said they will continue to invest. But even so, there isn't much money around at Marseille. And with those 2 factors, they're going to have to sell players. And I don't know how they would go about making enough money to replace the players that they sell, basically, because they're already a relatively thin squad. I think, especially in midfield at times, they can be a little bit exposed. And all right, they might be able to sell Kamara, who's obviously very good, a teenager. He might get 20, 30 million, possibly. Morgan Sanson, there's talk of him going to the Premier League again for a similar sort of amount. I don't know how Florian Thauvin goes for the 50 million they were talking about last season. There's been issues with his agent, and Thauvin being upset that he hasn't sort of been able to drum up enough interest, which, although I actually think he's actually been okay this season, has still probably been comfortably one of Marseille's best players. Think about the game of Amiens where he scored a hat-trick, brilliant hat-trick, 1-3-1. There's been instances like that. They have been rare, but overall he's actually been pretty decent, but still nowhere near the level of last season. And I don't know how they get 50 million for him this season. And there are a lot of older players that have been holding the club together, and they're on higher wages. Yes, so it'd be good to get rid of them, like Adil Rami, like Rolando, perhaps even like Luis Gustavo, although I would be pretty against getting rid of him because when he's on form, he's really, really good, and the fans love him, and he really represents the club well. But there are players like those guys, Payet too, who are on high wages but aren't worth anything, so they can't really. Well, Payet maybe would get a decent fee, but the others won't. So they haven't got the capital, both, it seems, from investment. They're worried about FFP, and the squad won't make enough money to buy a better squad, if you like. So it's really worrying times for Marseille, and I think that this crisis that they've been going on seems to be going on for sort of 5 years, where the only sort of bright spot was the Europa League final. Haven't made the Champions League since 2012, I think, for a fair while, and it just feels like this is just what Marseille are now. They're such a huge club, and I would argue historically France's biggest. But this sort of Champions project hasn't worked. The squad isn't working, and it just feels like there isn't a way out. They've bought terribly. Zubi Zaretta was the sporting director, was linked with Arsenal. I don't know why, because I don't think he signed any good players, and I think Dujay Kurtachar maybe is the only one that's worked out, and he only got a second chance in the team after others were in bad form. So, and you look at people like Mitroglou, who didn't work, terrible really in some games. Saint-Germain hasn't recaptured the form, although I like him, but I don't think he's recaptured the form he had at Monaco or Nice. There's Radonjic, 12 million for Nemanja Radonjic, who's been completely out of his depth. I just think that this is the worst it's been at Marseille for a long time, and they can't really be said to be in crisis anymore because this is just the new normal for them. It's been the same for 4 or 5 years, and the Champions project just simply hasn't worked.
Yeah, and then you think, like you say, that Strootman has been really poor.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of Roma fans had sort of warned them about it, and they still went through with it. Really, but they were delighted to get the money through for him. And then you think that as well, when they're linked with someone like Morelos, who is talented, but has had 5 red cards this season.
Wow.
I've watched him a few times for Rangers. He's probably. I don't think he's quite ready for a Marseille level. I think he's probably mid-table Ligue table, ready to then test further. But his disciplinary issues are awful. I don't think anyone could touch him with a barge pole. Really, he's so. He's so risque at getting something like a sending off, and what's even worse is what he maybe needs to remember is that Scotland doesn't have VAR. France does, really. If he does some of the stuff that he hasn't been caught for or been caught for afterwards, it possibly be even worse. So I don't see the worthy of investment. I think the only reason they're thinking about it is because the reported fee is around 15 to 18 million, which in this kind of market for that kind of player is actually pretty good, but it's such a wild risk because he can be such a erratic, almost insane person. I mean, Gerrard's even mentioned he's not sure how to control him and stop getting red cards. And if he's someone who's led a team to a Champions League winner to win a Champions League, it can't do it, then who can really? It makes it even more difficult and crazy to fathom.
I have got the answer to the only answer I can see, and you won't be surprised, to Marseille's problems is Teji Savernia. I think it has to be. He's probably available for less than 10 million, probably 8 million maybe. And he would run the team. I really think he would. So I think he has to be their priority this summer.
Just buy him a nice house. Make sure his mother's there. Make sure all his family's around him. Yeah. He needs to know everyone. Move his entire neighborhood if you need to. It probably only cost you a little bit, to be fair. Then maybe he can help out. But they will, while they haven't got much to play for now, they would absolutely love to play the role of spoiler against Lyon, who got a valuable point really against Lille. It looked like for a while that they might get all 3 in the first half, and then 2 absolutely awful defensive mistakes really cost them in their game against Lille. That meant that they'd gone 2-1 up, and it's only thankful to Leo Dubois that they actually got the point that they got, and that leaves them on the brink really, because you look at the games afterwards. Conan and Neiman, although we can't guarantee it, they look like more positive games for Lyon. So this is absolutely massive, because if they were to lose this one and Saint-Etienne win on Friday and they go 2 points behind them and chasing at the end of the season, and knowing how we've seen Lyon, it would be regardless of what's gone on this season with Genesio and the players and things behind the scenes, but not having Champions League football would be catastrophic for them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it would. I think it would be catastrophic, but I'd also think it would be a situation of their own making. I mean, on one regard, that's obvious, because if you have the talent, you don't perform, and you don't get what you want, that's your fault. But the Genesio situation was handled bizarrely, terribly by the club. I don't know who was responsible for the fact that the news got out they were going to offer him a new contract, and there's nothing perhaps they can do about that. But the fact that they were set to offer him that new contract, then it was sort of withdrawn after that defeat to Rennes in the Coupe de France semi-final, and then there was that game with Dijon where it was just they lost 3-1 at home. It was just a terrible, toxic atmosphere. Fans have been going at Genesio for a long time now, and it just feels like that it was self-implosion. And that hadn't happened, say, if they just come out and said, we'll decide about Genesio at the end of the year, as we did last year, Genesio would have been fine with that. He's going absolutely nowhere. He's Lyon through and through. Would have gone absolutely nowhere. Nothing would have changed with him. He would have said, fine, I'll wait till the end of the season and wait for the decision then, and we'll see where we're at. That would have been great, and they would have picked up a couple more wins. I would argue they've lost some silly games since that Rennes semi-final. Obviously, the defeat itself is going to be malaise-inducing, if you like. But I think that this is a situation the club have manufactured for themselves. And you're absolutely right. No Champions League football, given the stature of the team and the club and the new stadium and the talent they've got. and would be ridiculous, really. And I would argue that it's pretty equal with Saint-Etienne. All right, they're a point ahead with 3 games left. Saint-Etienne in much better form. They're a lot more sort of together. They're a lot more sort of predictable in terms of performances at the moment, and they could realistically be overhauled. If that Moussa Dembele header in injury time in the derby to win the derby will if they get into Champions League, that'll be why. So yeah, I think it would be a disaster actually if they didn't get into Champions League, and they're on the verge of sort of managing to mess it up, and it'd be a real shame for Genesio if they do end his tenure on such a low note, because I actually think he's been better than people give him credit for. I know that he gets a lot of criticism from the press and from a lot of journalists and the fans obviously don't like him, but all right, they have struggled against lower league teams and they've fluctuated in performances a lot. I think he's actually done at least a half decent job. I think he's done a pretty decent job overall. It just hasn't been as good as it perhaps could have been given the talent at his disposal. So yeah, I think no Champions League football for Lyon would be disastrous. And one more point to this: Marseille are in the same position as Montpellier that we talked about earlier. And Montpellier, we were saying, would fancy the game against Saint-Etienne. If Marseille can get a win here, then they'll and the results go their way. Say Montpellier win too, that they would see themselves as back in the chase for fourth, which is huge for Marseille. So, and Marseille obviously got talent and they can win this game. So it's a real tough one for Lyon.
Yeah, really, really tough one, and that's the thing, isn't it? They're missing out on Champions League football will be terrible, but I'm sure they'll be cheering on Chelsea on the Europa League final. They've made it through on penalties, and if they were to win, then the Ligue place will be an automatic spot, and not having to start in July will be just as positive, because that'll be a little bit of a blow, really, even if he gets that, because they've really sort of flattered to deceive a lot, haven't they? We've mentioned that they sort of play whatever level they're playing against, and it's come back to bite them numerous times, but it's just defensive silly moments. I mean, and it's come from 2 of their best players this season, really. Jason Denayer does the first one against Leo that gifts the ball for the opener, and then Leo Dubois sort of does I can't quite understand what he's trying to do during that free kick that allow Souari to grab the second as well. It's just so disappointing that they keep having these moments, and it's going to be interesting to see what their summer looks like, because there's going to be a couple looking at the door and a couple they will want to keep that teams might come for as well. So it's seeing what they can really do, because it looks like especially someone like Ndombele is going to be going, but maybe that might be a blessing in disguise in terms of maybe you play Aouar there then and then get a new defensive midfielder in or something like that. They've got an interesting summer ahead of them as well, but they'll be absolutely laser focused on making sure that they get Champions League football, or at least trying to. But problem is that, like we've mentioned, with the amount of people clearing out there, including Genesio, does anyone really care? I mean, there's even the offer that Genesio might stay on as a technical director, but he's kind of seems to have poo-pooed that idea in the end, and it is ready to just leave altogether, which is completely understandable in his scenario. There's the fact that strange report that they were talking to Juninho to come in as a sporting director with not really a heap of experience, and for some reason having Lemouche as the coach underneath him, which made even more baffling sense given his reign at Rennes, and the fact that they were talking more about Blancs and Mourinho's and such like that. It's a bit of a crazy show at the moment, and Olas needs to hopefully get into Champions League football first, and then second of all have a real plan in the summer and get it actioned as soon as possible to get the right people in the door and change this team for the better next season, and go again for Champions League football, yes, but a much better season overall and a better feeling, because they'll be glad that at least they got through the knockout stages of the Europa League, the Champions League, because it gave them a little bit of something in their season that has been pretty dire, really, in other circumstances. Let's get predictions. I feel like Lyon are going to win this one. Like we say, they play up to teams, and maybe this is their perfect chance to get one over someone they want to rival as well, and give them that one last step towards Champions League football as well. I'm going for a 2-1 win. Adam, what do you think?
It's going to be close. Marseille at home. Maybe just Lyon. I'm going to go 3-2, same as last season.
Yeah, it's definitely not one to miss, because Lyon Marseille games are always full of blood and thunder, much like a Saint-Etienne, maybe less so than a derby with Saint-Etienne, but always a great affair with top players going against it and big stakes in this one as well. So it'd be great to watch. That's all for this week. My thanks to Adam and all of you listening at home. Join us for the main show, which will be back on Monday. But for now, enjoy your weekend of football.